at least in the beginning of a philosophy class, everybody here is a philosopher, because if Aristotle's right, we all love to know. The whole point of being a philosopher is loving to know, right? Loving wisdom, at least, right? So, we take delight in our senses, all sorts of things. Animals have the faculty of sensation. They live by appearances and memories, but their main thrill is their quotidian food. The amount of food the big thrill for them, feeding a dog. It's dinner time. You tell the dog it's dinner time, and the dog is thrilled. And then they eat, and then they either go outside to do what they have to do after they eat, or they just lie down because now they're full and they're happy. So the biggest happiness is actually eating, for a lot of animals, right? Hopefully humans love also by art and reasonings, science and art, right? Now, he goes through the history of metaphysics, or the history of philosophy, and this is where we get a lot of the stuff about the pre-Socratics. Notice he starts talking about all the different philosophers that lived before him. And by the way, that's also where we get those. So we know what we know about Thales and Anaximander and Anaximenes and Pericles and so on, primarily because Aristotle writes about them and quotes from them. So if you go and you look at their quotations, most of the quotations that we have that we say are by like Thales or whatever, they're actually from Aristotle's works that are trying to describe the history of these philosophers that lead up to his philosophy. So he's got a particular bias in the way he presents them, because all of those philosophers are leading up to Aristotle. And of course, once you get to Aristotle now, he knows everything. He knows everything that there is to describe. And so we start off by looking at the principles of all things. And those he calls causes. So we only know things because of the first cause. Where do they come from? And I like comparing his sense of cause to Plato, because if we think about Plato, think of Plato as having two causes. The one is the material cause, so we call that matter, right? Just matter. Is it 1m or 2? Or 1t or 2? Matter, I think, just 1t, right? And then the other is the ideas. So the ideas are abstract. Matter is the physical stuff, and everything that is matter for Plato basically is somehow participating in the ideas. My one friend, I don't know if you saw the video I posted along with the videos from the class last week. It was Mark Failer I was talking with, and Mark got his PhD in Plato and mathematics. And he was trying to describe to me, as dense as I am, that there's kind of three different ways that matter and ideas are interrelated and so on. So it's kind of interesting, the complexity of how to try to figure that out. But when we move on to Aristotle, who basically argues that the ideas don't exist, so this goes away. And instead we just have the four causes. And so matter is one of those, or substance, right? And then the other are the ideas, which he also calls forms, by the way. So It's not that Aristotle or Plato calls them ideas or forms. I think they only call them ideas, but in translating, a lot of people will translate the idea as a form, the shape of something, right? So everything has substance, matter, and everything has a shape. But it also has what he calls the efficient cause, and that is how it got into the shape that it's in now. So, the carpenters that put rough wood supplies and things together to form a house, they're the efficient cause. The whole process, really, of transforming that substance into what it becomes. So the shape it becomes, the idea, the matter is the stuff that it was made of, and the efficient cause is how it actually got transformed into that. So that's always happening, actually. And then the last one is the telos. Just broke the magic marker. Is the efficient cause of its demise. Is the purpose, the reason that the thing is there. And Aristotle feels like everything is in its place. The reason things fall from trees is because it knows it's right now and it wants to go down to the ground. Things want to be where they end up. So it's not because they're heavy or anything. He does know that some things are heavier than others. One of the things that gets him in trouble with Galileo later is that he thinks that heavy things fall faster than lighter things. Turns out not to be true, right? But so everything has its purpose or its reason for being in this, what Frank Lovejoy called the great chain of being. So there's like a great chain of being. Everything is connected in its place in its hierarchy from the top to the bottom. So these are the four causes of things. The original philosophers were thinking primarily of matter. So when we think of Thales and the others, they were trying to figure out what were the archés of matter and so on. So here's Anaximenes. This is a different Diogenes. When we talk about Diogenes, the skeptic, or the cynic rather, that's a different Diogenes. Heraclitus of Ephesus says this of fire. Empedocles says of the four elements and adding a fourth, earth, to those which have been named. So there's earth, air, fire, water. And Aristotle will add ether as a fifth element, primarily to explain what the planets. So there's Anaxagoras, etc. So you get the idea. And he quotes poetry. Hesiod was one of the greats besides Homer. So Hesiod's works and days described an awful lot of the relationships between life and the gods and so on. So he's clearly very literate and knows what he's talking about from the Greek. Empedocles, by the way, is the one that puts all the different causes together. Big problem for them was the difference between permanence and change. How do you explain it? Because if things are one, there ought not to be change, and yet there is obviously change. So how do you explain that? So they had a lot of problems that he's trying to work with, that they tried to work with. The Pythagoreans, their arche is number, etc. So you see where all that came from. So this is interesting. We think of the Pythagorean table of the 10 opposites, which he's outlining here, as something that's still in our culture. Still think of white and black as opposites, or maybe antinomies, I suppose. Are you bored? See how boring this can be? Maybe, maybe not. So, Parmenides, we get something about Parmenides here, Xenophanes. So when we're looking at the kind of history that we have of the pre-Socratics, we get a lot from him, including he talks about Plato, and here we go, because he loves Plato, but at the same time he disagrees with many of the things that Plato argues for. So we get all that. So the forms were the causes of all things. So let me move on to the traditional square now. So there's lots of different kinds of utterances that we can make that are not true or false. So for example, I can say, yippee, I'm happy, right? That's not true or false though. You know, you can't ask it, you know what that's all about. If I give you an imperative, go shut the door, that's neither true nor false, right? That's an imperative. If I ask you a question, those questions are neither true nor false. So when we get down to it, what kinds of things that we say might we consider to be true or false? And Aristotle figures out that there's only 4 kinds of statements that we can make that are going to be either true or false. And those are statements where you have a relationship between 2 categories, what we might call the subject category and the predicate category, or we might call it the sets, you know, the subject set and the predicate set. So if I'm walking across the room, that's a true statement while I was doing it, right? And how would I compare that statement to one of these? I would analyze it by saying, I'm the set that is the subject of that sentence, and the set of all the things walking across the room are the predicate set. So I'm in the set of things that are walking across the room. And so that would be an A statement, because I'm all the members of that set. But if we think about what the relationships are between these 4 different kinds of statements, you have to compare them with exactly the same 2 terms in both the subject and the predicate set. So for example, hopefully this isn't too politically incorrect, but if I say all blondes have more fun. It's okay, right? I'm not well, whatever. By the way, students have replied to me when I use that as an example that it's false. It's not true that all blondes have more fun. Not being blonde, I can't participate in concluding that. But in any case, I'll trust them that all blondes have more fun. So the set of things that are blonde and the set of things that are having more fun, right? So those are my 2 sets of things. So the A statement, all blondes have more fun, is false. The E statement, no blonde has more fun, right? They're mutually excluded, right? Students tell me that that's false also. So it's false that no blondes have more fun, so clearly some blondes have more fun, which is I, the I statement. So some blondes do have more fun, and some blondes do not have more fun, right? So if you put those 4 statements on the square, notice that both I and O are true, and they contradict A and E. right? So the I statement, some blonde has more fun, contradicts the E statement that no blonde has more fun. Both can't be true. In fact, one has to be true and the other one false. They're contradictory, right? Same thing with this. If you say some blonde is not having more fun, well, that means that it's not true that every blonde has fun, right? So you can see they're contradicting across this direction. But notice if that particular statement, all blondes have more fun,